The night was supposed to be an ordinary one. Nicole had insisted on hosting another one of her get-togethers with her so-called friends. These gatherings had become more frequent lately, filled with laughter that didn't quite reach me, conversations I wasn't part of, and glances that carried more than they let on. Still, I played my role, the quiet, accommodating husband who didn't rock the boat. But that night was different. I should have seen it coming. Nicole had been distant for weeks, her laughter louder with her friends and colder when we were alone. Evan, her coworker, was there again. He'd started showing up at these gatherings more often, always lingering too close to Nicole, speaking just a little too softly when he leaned in to whisper something to her. I told myself I was imagining things, that no one would be so bold as to flaunt their disrespect right in front of me. But the truth was undeniable when it unfolded before my eyes. The evening began innocently enough. Nicole flitted between the kitchen and the living room, laughing with her friends, pouring drinks, and basking in the attention she always seemed to crave. I stayed in the background, refilling snack bowls and answering small talk questions from people who barely remembered my name. Evan was seated in the center of the room, holding court like he owned the place. His charm oozed with arrogance, and the others seemed captivated by his every word. Nicole was right next to him, her hand resting too casually on his arm, her laugh too bright at his every joke. I felt like an outsider in my own home. It happened in the middle of one of Evan's stories, some exaggerated tale about his recent adventure abroad. The group was in stitches, their laughter echoing off the walls. I was standing near the doorway, watching the scene with a tight smile, when Nicole's voice cut through the noise. "Adrian," she called, her tone dripping with mock sweetness. "Why don't you come join us? Or are you too busy sulking over there?" Her words drew the room's attention. I felt every pair of eyes turn to me, felt the weight of their smirks and barely hidden amusement. "I'm fine," I said calmly, forcing the smile to stay on my face. But Nicole wasn't done. She stood, holding a pitcher of water in her hand. "Oh, come on. Lighten up. Here, let me help you cool off." Before I could react, she tipped the pitcher forward, and the cold water poured over my head. The room erupted in laughter. Evans was the loudest, his smirk spreading as he leaned back in his seat, clearly enjoying the show. Nicole's friends joined in, their voices blending into a cacophony of ridicule. I stood there, drenched and humiliated, my clothes sticking to my skin, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. My heart pounded, not with anger but with something deeper, colder. Nicole looked at me with triumph in her eyes, as if she'd won some unspoken game. "Oh, come on, Adrian," she said, her voice dripping with false innocence. "It's just a joke. Don't be such a buzzkill." I didn't respond. I didn't give her or anyone else the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I straightened my back, locked eyes with Nicole, and walked out of the room without saying a word. As I stepped into the quiet of the kitchen, away from their laughter, I felt a strange sense of clarity settle over me. This wasn't about the water. It wasn't about the laughter or the humiliation. This was about respect, about how little she thought of me, how easily she dismissed me in front of her lover and friends. I grabbed a towel and dried my face, staring at my reflection in the dark window above the sink. This ends tonight, I thought to myself. The laughter from the living room continued, but it sounded distant now, like a storm moving further away. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was calm, calculated. Nicole thought she'd humiliated me, thought she'd put me in my place. But she had no idea what I was capable of when pushed too far. That night, I vowed to make her see just how wrong she was. The first move had been hers, but the game was far from over. I spent the rest of the evening in the solitude of the guest room, listening to the muffled laughter echoing from the living room. It wasn't the kind of laughter that came from genuine joy. It was the kind of laughter that fed on someone else's humiliation. My humiliation. Nicole's voice rose above the rest, playful, teasing, always loud enough to let me know I was still the topic of their amusement. Evan's laugh followed close behind, deep and smug, as if he'd just scored another victory at my expense. I clenched my fists, staring at the bare wall in front of me. They thought they'd won. They thought I'd retreat quietly, accept their mockery, and go on pretending everything was fine. But they didn't know me as well as they thought. The morning after, the house was eerily quiet. Nicole's friends had left sometime in the early hours, and the place carried the faint scent of stale alcohol and regret. Or maybe that was just me projecting. Nicole was still asleep, her arrogance resting as peacefully as she had. I, however, had spent the night staring at the ceiling, piecing together everything I'd ignored for too long. This wasn't just about last night. It wasn't just about the water or the laughter. It was about a pattern, a gradual erosion of respect, trust, and love. Nicole's actions didn't happen in isolation, and her circle of friends had played a role in enabling her. There was Lila, her best friend since college, the self-appointed queen of their little group. She was the one who always encouraged Nicole to live a little, to put herself first. Lila had been there every step of the way, whispering in Nicole's ear, stoking her ego, and fueling her disdain for me. Then there was Mark, the quiet one in the group. He wasn't as vocal as Lila or as smug as Evan, but his silence spoke volumes. Mark was the type to avoid conflict, to laugh along even when he didn't find the joke funny. I'd caught him glancing at me a few times during their gatherings, his expression betraying a hint of discomfort. But he never spoke up, and that made him just as complicit. And finally, Evan, the root of it all. He was the kind of man who thrived on control, who walked into a room and immediately sought out the person he could dominate. He charmed his way into Nicole's life, planting seeds of dissatisfaction and convincing her that he could offer her something I couldn't. As I stood in the kitchen, making a pot of coffee, Nicole walked in. She didn't look embarrassed or remorseful. If anything, she looked smug, her lips curling into a faint smile as she reached for a mug. "Morning," she said casually, as if last night had been nothing more than a funny little prank. I didn't respond. I poured my coffee, set the pot back down, and turned to leave. "Oh, come on, Adrian," she called after me. "You're not still mad about last night, are you? It was just a joke. You've got to learn to laugh at yourself." I stopped in the doorway, my back to her. "Funny," I said, my voice steady. "I don't remember laughing." Her smirk faltered, but I didn't stick around to see her reaction. That day, I started laying the groundwork. I knew I couldn't confront Nicole directly, not yet. People like her and her circle thrived on deflection, on twisting the narrative to make themselves the victims. If I wanted to reclaim my dignity, I had to be smart about it. I reached out to Sam, an old friend who worked as a paramedic. Sam had always been good at keeping a level head, even in the most chaotic situations. If anyone could help me think clearly, it was him. "She poured water on you? In front of her lover and friends?" Sam asked, incredulous. "Yep," I said, sipping my coffee. "And you didn't lose it?" "No," I replied. "I don't want to lose it, Sam. I want to take it back." Sam let out a low whistle. "All right," he said. "Tell me what you need." By the time I hung up the phone, I had a plan. Nicole, Evan, Lila, and the rest of them thought they could humiliate me and walk away unscathed. They thought I'd stay in the background, licking my wounds while they carried on with their lives. But they were wrong. I wasn't just going to take back my dignity, I was going to take back control. And when I was done, they'd finally understand what it meant to cross me. The first move was theirs, but now it was my turn. I spent the day walking through the echoes of last night's humiliation, each memory replaying in my mind like a broken record. The laughter, the cold splash of water, the smug look on Nicole's face. It all lingered, clawing at the edges of my sanity. But instead of anger, I felt a strange, detached calm. Anger would have been too easy, too predictable. Nicole and her friends expected me to lash out, to let my emotions get the better of me. That's what people like them thrived on, watching others lose control. But I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. No, I had other plans. That afternoon, while Nicole was out, likely with Evan, I sat in the quiet of the kitchen, staring at the coffee mug in my hands. The silence was heavy but not oppressive. It was the kind of silence that lets you think clearly, that sharpens your focus and steadies your resolve. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Sam. Sam had always been a straight shooter, the kind of guy who could see through any situation and offer clarity. I hadn't seen him much since Nicole started pulling me away from my old life, but I knew I could count on him now. "Adrian," he said when he picked up. "Long time, man. What's up?" I hesitated for a moment, the words catching in my throat, but then I remembered the laughter, the water dripping down my face, and Nicole's voice mocking me in front of her lover. "I need your help," I said finally. We met later that evening at a quiet cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one cared to eavesdrop. Sam was already there when I arrived, his paramedic uniform a stark contrast to the casual diners around him. "You look like hell," he said as I slid into the booth across from him. "Feel like it too," I replied, forcing a smile. He leaned forward, his expression serious. "All right, tell me what's going on." I told him everything, Nicole's affair, Evan's smug arrogance, the friends who had laughed at my humiliation. By the time I finished, Sam was shaking his head, his jaw tight with anger on my behalf. "Damn," he said. "That's low, even for her." "It's not just her," I said. "It's all of them. Lila, Mark, Evan. They've been feeding off this for months. I was too blind to see it, but now—" I trailed off, my fists clenching on the table. Sam nodded slowly. "You want payback." "I want justice," I corrected him. "I want them to feel the weight of what they've done. I want them to understand that they can't just walk all over people and expect no consequences." Sam leaned back, crossing his arms. "All right. So, what's the plan?" That was the moment the fog lifted. For weeks, I'd been living in a haze, going through the motions while Nicole and her friends slowly dismantled my dignity. But now, with Sam's unwavering support, I could see clearly. We spent the next 2 hours laying the groundwork, brainstorming ways to expose Nicole and her circle for what they really were. Sam's experience as a paramedic proved invaluable. His knowledge of emergency protocols and his network of contacts opened doors I hadn't considered. "I'll need to keep things subtle," I said, sketching out a rough plan on a napkin. "If I confront them head-on, they'll just turn it around on me. I need to make them unravel on their own." Sam nodded, a sly grin spreading across his face. "You're thinking long-term. I like it." By the time we left the cafe, I felt lighter, more in control than I had in weeks. Nicole thought she could humiliate me, that I'd sit quietly and let her have her way. But she had underestimated me. This wasn't just about last night. This was about every moment she had chipped away at my self-respect, every time she'd chosen her ego over our marriage. Nicole, Evan, and their little circle of enablers thought they were untouchable. They thought they could laugh at me and walk away unscathed. But the game was just beginning, and this time, the rules were mine to set. It's strange how the smallest details can escape you when you're too close to a situation. For months, I had been living in the shadow of Nicole's deceit, oblivious to the signs that now seemed so obvious. But with Sam's help, I began peeling back the layers of her betrayal, uncovering truths that were darker than I'd imagined. Nicole wasn't just unfaithful, she was calculated. Every laugh at my expense, every flirtatious glance at Evan, every snide comment she made about me in front of her friends was part of a larger pattern. She didn't just fall into an affair. She engineered it, feeding off the validation her little circle gave her. And they, in turn, thrived on her drama, like moths drawn to a flame. It was time to extinguish that flame. I started by retracing her steps, paying attention to the details I'd ignored for so long. Nicole had grown careless, as people often do when they think they're untouchable. Her phone buzzed with notifications she didn't bother hiding anymore. Her schedule was littered with work meetings that conveniently aligned with Evan's absences, and her spending habits had shifted dramatically. Expensive dinners, new clothes, even jewelry she'd never worn at home. But it wasn't enough to confirm what I already knew. I needed proof. Sam introduced me to a contact of his, a private investigator named Ray. Ray was the kind of guy you wouldn't notice in a crowd, quiet, unassuming, but razor-sharp. "You're looking for something specific, or just the general dirt?" Ray asked when we met at his office. "Both," I replied. "I want to know exactly how deep this goes. Who's involved, where they meet, how long it's been happening, everything." Ray nodded, his face expressionless. Give me a week. While Ray worked, I turned my attention to Nicole's circle of friends. They weren't just bystanders. They were accomplices, actively encouraging her behavior. Lila, her so-called best friend, was the worst of them all. Lila had always been loud, opinionated, and unapologetically self-centered. She thrived on drama, often creating it where none existed. She had been the one to introduce Nicole to Evan at a party months ago, planting the seed of their affair. Then there was Mark. He was quieter, less abrasive than Lila, but no less complicit. Mark was the kind of man who avoided confrontation at all costs, even if it meant enabling terrible behavior. He was always there, laughing along, offering half-hearted reassurances when things got too heated. And finally, Evan, the man at the center of it all. He wasn't just arrogant. He was dangerous. Evan had a reputation for being manipulative, using people as stepping stones to get what he wanted. Nicole wasn't his first affair, and I doubted she'd be his last. When Ray finally called, his findings were worse than I'd expected. "Your wife's been seeing Evan for almost a year," he said, his voice matter of fact. "They meet at his place, mostly. Sometimes at hotels. She's also been spending money on him. Gifts, dinners, even covering his rent a couple of times." My stomach turned, but I kept my voice steady. "What else?" "Evan's not clean," Ray continued. "He's involved in some shady business deals, fraud, mostly. I've got copies of emails, bank transactions, even a couple of phone recordings. If this blows up, he's looking at serious jail time." A dark satisfaction settled over me. Evan thought he was untouchable, but he'd left a trail. And Nicole, blinded by her infatuation, had tied herself to his sinking ship. That night, I sat in my kitchen, going over Ray's findings. The evidence was damning. Text messages, photos, financial records, all neatly organized in a folder. I thought about confronting Nicole then and there, throwing the evidence in her face and watching her squirm. But that would be too easy. She'd deny it, twist it, turn it back on me. No, I needed to be smarter. This wasn't just about exposing Nicole and Evan. It was about dismantling the entire illusion they'd built. Lila, Mark, and the rest of their circle needed to see the truth, too. They needed to understand the cost of their arrogance. I called Sam, my voice calm but firm. "It's worse than I thought," I said. "I figured as much," he replied. "What's the next move?" "We're going to let them hang themselves," I said. "Step by step. By the time we're done, they'll have no one left to blame but themselves." Sam chuckled, a low, knowing sound. "Now we're talking." As I hung up the phone, I felt the first stirrings of control returning to my life. Nicole thought she'd won, that her actions would have no consequences. But she was wrong. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Sitting in my kitchen late that night, surrounded by the evidence Ray had uncovered, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. Nicole, Evan, and their little circle of enablers thought they were untouchable. They thought they could humiliate me, strip me of my dignity, and carry on with their lives as if nothing had happened. But they underestimated me. I wasn't going to confront them in anger or desperation. That would give them exactly what they wanted. A chance to dismiss me, to twist the narrative and make themselves the victims. No, I needed to be calculated, precise. It was time to set my plan into motion. The first step was to use what I'd learned about Evan. His shady business deals and fraudulent activities were a ticking time bomb, and I was more than happy to light the fuse. I gathered the most damning pieces of evidence Ray had provided, emails, bank statements, and recorded calls, and compiled them into a neat, anonymous package. Sam helped me craft the perfect narrative to accompany the evidence. "It has to look like a whistleblower's tip," he said, sipping his coffee. "Someone on the inside who got fed up with Evan's games." Together, we sent the package to a local journalist known for exposing white-collar criminals. Megan was sharp, relentless, and had a knack for turning whispers into front-page scandals. I knew she'd sink her teeth into Evan's story and wouldn't let go until the whole city knew his name. The next step was more personal. Nicole and her friends thrived on appearances, on their carefully curated image of superiority and success. I wanted to shatter that image, piece by piece. I started with Lila. She was the queen bee of their group, the one who pulled the strings and kept the drama alive. I knew from Ray's investigation that Lila had her own skeletons, questionable financial dealings, an affair with a married man, and a habit of using her friends for personal gain. Through an anonymous email, I fed snippets of her indiscretions to a few of her colleagues. The gossip spread like wildfire, and within days, Lila's reputation at work was in tatters. Next was Mark. He wasn't as active in the group's antics, but his silence made him complicit. Mark had a drinking problem he kept hidden from most people, but I'd seen it firsthand at Nicole's parties. I didn't have to do much, just a gentle nudge to his boss, mentioning my concern for Mark's well-being. Within a week, Mark was pulled aside at work and offered mandatory counseling. It wasn't malicious, but it sent a clear message. Silence has consequences. While the seeds of chaos took root among Nicole's friends, I began laying the groundwork for my confrontation with her and Evan. I wasn't going to ambush them in private. That would be too easy to ignore. Instead, I planned to confront them in front of their friends, the same people who had laughed at me, mocked me, and supported their betrayal. Sam and I coordinated every detail. He agreed to play a key role, not just as my moral support, but as someone who could escalate the situation if necessary. His connections as a paramedic gave us an edge. He knew exactly how to make a scene look bigger than it was, to draw attention to the right people at the right time. "Are you sure you want to do this publicly?" Sam asked one night as we reviewed the plan. "They humiliated me in front of everyone," I replied. "They don't deserve the courtesy of a private reckoning." Sam nodded, his expression firm. "Then let's make sure they never forget it." The final piece of the puzzle was timing. Nicole and her friends were planning another gathering in 2 weeks, a casual dinner party at Evan's apartment. It was the perfect setting, intimate enough to keep things contained but public enough to make their humiliation unforgettable. I spent the days leading up to the party fine-tuning every detail, ensuring no loose ends could come back to haunt me. The evidence was ready, the anonymous tips were spreading, and Megan's article on Evan was nearly finished. By the time the party rolled around, everything was in place. Nicole and Evan thought they'd broken me, but they had no idea what was coming. As I stood in front of the mirror that evening, adjusting my tie, I felt a strange sense of calm. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my power. Nicole wanted to play games. Now it was my turn to show her how they're really played. The days leading up to the party felt like a calm before the storm. Everything was in place. The evidence, the whispers spreading through their social circles, and the looming article Megan was preparing about Evan's fraudulent activities. The groundwork was solid. All I had to do now was wait. But waiting wasn't as easy as I'd imagined. Each day felt heavier, each passing hour a reminder of what was coming. My mind replayed the humiliation I had endured, Nicole's cold laughter, the smug arrogance on Evan's face, and the way her friends had cheered them on. The memory stoked the fire inside me, sharpening my focus, keeping me resolute. Nicole, oblivious as ever, carried on with her life as though nothing had changed. She still smiled when Evan called, still met with her friends to gossip and laugh, and still acted like I was an afterthought. I let her think she had one. For now, 2 days before the party, I overheard Nicole on the phone with Lila. She was in the kitchen, her voice animated, almost giddy. "Evan's really pulling out all the stops for Saturday," she said, her tone light and carefree. "It's going to be perfect. Just wait until you see what he's planned." My stomach tightened, but I kept my face neutral as I walked past her. "What about Adrian?" Lila asked through the speaker. "Is he coming?" Nicole laughed, a sound that grated against my nerves. "Oh, please. He wouldn't dare show up. He knows his place by now." I felt the corner of my mouth twitch, but I said nothing. I poured myself a glass of water and walked out of the room, her laughter trailing behind me. That night, I met with Sam at his place. We reviewed the plan one last time, going over every detail to make sure nothing could go wrong. "Are you ready for this?" Sam asked, his expression serious. I nodded. "I've been ready since the moment she poured that water on me." Sam smirked. "Good. Because once this starts, there's no turning back." The day of the party arrived, and I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The chaos I had orchestrated was already in motion, rippling through their lives in ways they hadn't even realized yet. Megan's article was set to go live that evening, perfectly timed to coincide with the gathering. I dressed carefully, choosing a suit that was sharp but understated. I wanted to look composed, confident, a stark contrast to the man they had laughed at weeks ago. When Nicole saw me getting ready, her expression shifted to one of surprise. "What's the occasion?" she asked, her tone laced with suspicion. "Just heading out," I replied casually, adjusting my tie in the mirror. She tilted her head, studying me. "You're not going to Evans, are you?" I turned to face her, meeting her gaze head-on. "Why wouldn't I?" Her lips parted slightly, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You weren't invited," she said finally, her voice faltering just a little. I smiled, a calm, measured expression. "I don't need an invitation, Nicole. It's my life they've been laughing at, after all. I think it's only fair I join in on the fun." She didn't say anything, but the look on her face was enough. For the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. The party was in full swing by the time I arrived. Laughter and music spilled out of Evan's apartment, a cacophony of arrogance and self-satisfaction. I stood outside the door for a moment, letting the sounds wash over me. When I stepped inside, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to me, and I met each gaze with calm indifference. Nicole was standing near the bar with Evan, her face pale, her drink frozen halfway to her lips. "Adrian," Evan said, recovering quickly. His smirk returned, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Didn't think you'd show up?" "Why wouldn't I?" I replied, my tone cool. "After all, I wouldn't want to miss the chance to toast to your success." Evan's smirk faltered just slightly, but he covered it with a chuckle. Nicole, meanwhile, was staring at me like she'd seen a ghost. I scanned the room, taking in the familiar faces of her friends, Lila, Mark, and the others who had laughed at my humiliation. I felt the weight of their eyes on me, their unease growing with each passing second. "Shall we get started?" I asked, raising my glass in a mock toast. They didn't know it yet, but the storm was about to hit, and this time, they wouldn't be laughing. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. As I stood there, glass in hand, I felt every eye on me, confused, skeptical, some even nervous. Evan was the first to recover, flashing that arrogant smirk he always wore like armor. "Well, this is unexpected," he said, his voice oozing fake charm. "Glad you could join us, Adrian, though I can't help but wonder why." I smiled back at him, calm and composed. "Why wouldn't I come? After all, you've all been so invested in my life lately." It felt rude to not return the favor. A ripple of unease passed through the group, though some tried to laugh it off. Nicole, however, wasn't laughing. She stood by the bar, her drink clutched tightly in her hand, her face pale. "Adrian," she began, her voice hesitant, "I don't think this is the right time or place." "Oh, I disagree." I cut her off, my tone sharp but controlled. "This is the perfect time and place." I stepped further into the room, my eyes scanning the familiar faces of her friends, Lila, Mark, and a few others whose names didn't matter. They were all complicit, their laughter and silence feeding into the betrayal that had festered in my own home. "Let's start with some introductions, shall we?" I said, setting my glass down on the nearest table. "Most of you already know me as Nicole's husband, the man you've all been laughing at behind his back, or, more recently, to his face." A nervous chuckle escaped from Lila, but she quickly stopped when I turned my gaze on her. "And you," I said, pointing at her, "have been her biggest cheerleader, haven't you, Lila?" Encouraging her every step of the way, whispering in her ear about how much better her life would be without me. Lila opened her mouth to protest, but I held up a hand to silence her. "Don't worry, we'll get to you later." I turned my attention to Evan, who leaned casually against the back of a chair, still smirking. "And then there's you," I said, my voice cold. "The man who thought he could waltz into my life, take what wasn't his, and get away with it." Evan shrugged, his smirk widening. "It's not my fault she chose me." His words were like gasoline on a fire, but I didn't let them ignite me. Instead, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folder, holding it up for everyone to see. You might want to rethink that confidence, Evan, I said, because this folder contains everything I need to destroy you. Bank records, fraudulent transactions, even emails detailing your little business ventures. The room fell silent. Evan's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of unease. What the hell are you talking about? He asked, his voice suddenly defensive. I opened the folder and pulled out a stack of documents, laying them on the coffee table for everyone to see. I'm talking about the people you've conned, the businesses you've defrauded, and the lies you've told to keep up this charade. Nicole stepped forward, her voice shaking. Adrian, stop. This isn't the place for. Why not? I snapped, turning to face her. You didn't seem to mind humiliating me in front of these people. Why should I extend you any courtesy now? She froze, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for a response. The final blow came when Sam, who had been waiting outside, entered the room with perfect timing. Dressed in his paramedic uniform, he carried a clipboard and looked every bit the professional. Sorry to interrupt, he said, his tone calm, but I believe you're Evan Carter? Evan's face drained of color. What's this about? Sam held up the clipboard. You've been reported for financial fraud and endangerment. Authorities have been alerted, and I'm here to ensure the situation is handled properly. The room erupted into chaos. Nicole turned to Evan, her voice panicked. What is he talking about? Evan, is this true? Evan stammered, his confidence crumbling. I don't know what he's talking about. This is a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. It was the truth, and it was all laid bare for everyone to see. As the chaos unfolded, I stood back and watched, my heart steady. Lila tried to defend Evan. Mark looked like he wanted to sink into the floor, and Nicole, she just stood there, tears streaming down her face, her world unraveling before her eyes. When Evan was finally escorted out, the room fell silent again. Nicole turned to me, her voice trembling. Adrian, I didn't know. I didn't. I looked at her, my expression unreadable. You chose him, Nicole. You chose all of this. And now, you get to live with it. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the apartment, leaving them to deal with the wreckage they had created. This time, the laughter was gone, and for the first time in months, I felt free. As I walked out of Evan's apartment, leaving behind the chaos I'd orchestrated, I felt the weight of their panic trailing me. The echo of Nicole's voice, trembling with disbelief, still rang in my ears. Adrian, I didn't know. I didn't. But she did know. Maybe not the full scope of Evan's crimes, but she knew enough. She knew she was betraying me, knew she was choosing her own selfish desires over our marriage. And now, as the facade she'd built came crashing down, I couldn't bring myself to care about her excuses. The truth had been laid bare. The humiliation she and her friends had heaped on me was now theirs to endure. But I wasn't done yet. By the time I got home, Sam was waiting for me, leaning casually against his car in the driveway. His paramedic uniform was slightly rumpled, but his grin was sharp and intact. How'd it go? He asked as I approached. Perfect, I replied, unlocking the door and gesturing for him to come inside. Evan cracked like an egg. Nicole and her friends? They're reeling. Sam chuckled, following me into the house. Good. They deserve every second of it. We sat at the dining table, a bottle of whiskey between us. As I poured us each a glass, I couldn't help but replay the night's events in my mind. The look on Evan's face when I laid out the evidence, the panic in Nicole's eyes when she realized how deep she was in. It was everything I'd planned for and more. But there was still one loose end to tie up. The next morning, I woke to a flood of messages on my phone. Claire, Nicole's more level-headed friend, had sent a string of texts, asking if we could talk. Then there were the missed calls, one from Nicole, another from Lila. I didn't bother answering either. Instead, I focused on Megan's article, which had gone live overnight. The headline was bold and damning. Local entrepreneur exposed as serial fraudster. Victims speak out against Evan Carter. The piece detailed everything, from Evan's fraudulent business dealings to the emotional manipulation he used to charm his victims. Megan had done her job well, and the article was already gaining traction online. The comment section was brutal, filled with people expressing outrage and disbelief. By midday, the story had spread beyond the local scene. News outlets were picking it up, and Evan's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. I knew it wouldn't be long before Nicole showed up. Sure enough, by mid-afternoon, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, she stood there, disheveled and pale. Her makeup was smudged, and her eyes were red, like she'd been crying for hours. "Adrian," she said, her voice shaky. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside, letting her in. She hesitated for a moment before walking into the living room, her movements uncertain, almost hesitant. "Sit," I said, gesturing to the couch. She perched on the edge of the cushion, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I don't even know where to start," she said finally. "How about with the truth?" I replied, leaning back in my chair. "That would be a good place to start, don't you think?" She flinched at the sharpness in my tone but nodded. "I didn't know Evan was. I didn't know he was a criminal. I thought he was. Better than me?" I interrupted. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. "That's not what I meant. Isn't it?" I shot back. "You poured water on me in front of him, Nicole. You humiliated me in front of your friends, in front of him. You laughed at me, made me the punchline of your little games. And for what? Because you thought he was better than me. Admit it." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she shook her head. "I was stupid. I made a mistake, Adrian. I see that now. Please, just stop," I said, my voice firm. "You don't get to rewrite history now. You made your choice. You picked him, Nicole. You picked them. And now, you get to live with the consequences." She sat there, sobbing softly, while I watched her crumble. For a moment, I felt a pang of something, sympathy, maybe, but it passed quickly, replaced by the cold satisfaction of knowing she was finally feeling the weight of her actions. "Evan's done," I continued. "His career, his reputation, everything. It's over. And you? You tied yourself to him. So don't come here asking me to fix it." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't soften. "Go home, Nicole," I said, standing and walking to the door. "Figure out your next move. But whatever it is, don't involve me. I'm done cleaning up your messes." She hesitated, her eyes pleading, but when I didn't budge, she stood and walked out. As I closed the door behind her, I felt a sense of closure. The storm I'd endured was over, and while Nicole's life lay in ruins, I was already building something stronger, something better. This time, I was the one in control. When Nicole walked out of my house that day, I thought it might be the last time I'd see her. But the fallout from everything I'd set in motion had a way of creeping back into my life, bringing with it echoes of the chaos I'd left behind. Evan's downfall was swift and brutal. Megan's article had gone viral, dragging every skeleton out of his meticulously curated closet. His fraudulent dealings, his manipulative tactics, the victims he'd left in his wake. It was all laid bare for the world to see. Within days, his business partners distanced themselves, publicly denouncing him to salvage their own reputations. His name was blacklisted in professional circles, his accounts frozen pending investigations. It was as if the man who had strutted through life with smug arrogance had vanished overnight, replaced by a pariah with nowhere to hide. And Nicole? She was caught in the crossfire. It started with whispers. Her friends, the ones who had once laughed with her at my expense, began questioning their loyalty. Lila, ever the opportunist, was the first to jump ship. She distanced herself from Nicole, claiming she'd had no idea about Evan's true nature. Mark, whose silence had always been his way of avoiding responsibility, followed suit. He didn't say much, just stopped returning Nicole's calls and quietly unfriended her on social media. The same friends who had cheered her on were now abandoning her, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Nicole's social circle, once a tight-knit group of enablers, dissolved almost overnight. Claire, the only one who had ever shown a shred of decency, reached out to me. "She's not doing well," Claire said over the phone. "She's lost everything, Adrian. Evan's gone, her friends won't talk to her, and her job's on the line because of all the attention. She's falling apart." I listened silently, letting Claire vent her concern. "She's not asking for your forgiveness," Claire continued. But she wanted me to tell you that she's sorry. For everything. Her words hung in the air, heavy and meaningless. Sorry? Sorry didn't erase what she'd done. Sorry didn't take back the humiliation, the betrayal, the nights I'd spent questioning my worth. I appreciate you telling me, I said finally, my voice flat. But what she feels now doesn't change what happened. Claire sighed. I didn't think it would. I just thought you should know. Nicole's attempts to rebuild her life were met with resistance at every turn. The scandal had tarnished her reputation, and her association with Evan made her a subject of gossip and speculation. People whispered about her at work, casting sideways glances when she walked by. She tried reaching out to me again. Text messages at first, then a call I didn't bother answering. The messages were a mix of apologies and desperate pleas, each one more pathetic than the last. I know I hurt you, Adrian. I was wrong. Please, can we just talk? You don't have to forgive me, but I need to explain. I need you to understand. I deleted each one without responding. She'd had her chance to explain. She'd chosen her path, and now she had to walk it alone. Meanwhile, my own life had taken a turn for the better. With Nicole and her toxic circle out of the picture, I found myself with more clarity, more energy to focus on what truly mattered. Sam and I started hanging out more often, our friendship rekindled by the chaos we'd weathered together. He'd been my rock through all of this, and I owed him more than I could ever repay. You're a free man now, Sam said one evening as we sat on my balcony, beers in hand. What's next? Rebuilding, I said simply. Starting fresh, living my life on my terms. One afternoon, as I sorted through old papers, I came across a wedding photo of Nicole and me. I stared at it for a long moment, memories flashing through my mind. The laughter, the promises, the love that had once felt so real. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel sadness or regret. I felt nothing. I slipped the photo into a box and closed it, sealing that chapter of my life for good. Nicole's world had crumbled, and I had been the architect of her downfall. But I wasn't reveling in it anymore. I was moving on, building something better for myself. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. And as I looked out at the horizon, I realized that this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new one. By the time the dust finally settled, I found myself standing in the wreckage of a life I no longer recognized. But for the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel broken. I felt liberated. The weight of Nicole's betrayal, the humiliation, the anger, it had all been stripped away, leaving something clearer, sharper, and stronger in its place. Nicole's downfall was complete. Evan had disappeared, his fraudulent empire crumbling beneath the weight of his lies and Megan's relentless reporting. Nicole's friends, those shallow sycophants who had laughed at my expense, had scattered, each too self-serving to stay loyal when the tide turned. And Nicole? She was a shadow of her former self. The messages stopped coming after a few weeks. Claire told me she had moved back in with her parents, a woman seeking refuge from a world that no longer had space for her arrogance. She was trying to rebuild, but her pleas for forgiveness no longer mattered to me. I had my own rebuilding to do. The first step was reclaiming my space, my home, my time, my mind. I started with the house. Nicole had filled it with trinkets and reminders of her superficial tastes, and I systematically stripped it all away. The living room, once cluttered with throw pillows and abstract art I'd never cared for, became clean and minimalist. The bedroom, which had felt cold and alien for so long, became a sanctuary. Even the kitchen felt different as I rearranged it to suit my needs, not hers. Each change, no matter how small, felt like a step toward reclaiming myself. My next step was reconnecting with the parts of my life that Nicole had slowly eroded. I started spending more time with Sam, whose steady support had been a lifeline through the storm. "You're finally looking like yourself again," he said one night as we grabbed drinks at a local bar. "I feel like myself again," I admitted. Sam raised his glass. "To freedom." "To freedom," I echoed, clinking my glass against his. Work became a source of pride again. Without Nicole's constant criticisms or demands pulling my attention, I threw myself into my projects with a renewed sense of purpose. My focus didn't go unnoticed. Within months, I landed a promotion that had once felt out of reach. The recognition wasn't just professional, it was personal. I had proven to myself that I wasn't defined by Nicole's betrayal or anyone else's opinion of me. One evening, as I sat on my balcony with a glass of whiskey, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The humiliation Nicole had subjected me to, the carefully orchestrated revenge I'd enacted, the way their laughter had turned to pleading cries. It had all been necessary. But it wasn't who I was anymore. I didn't feel the need to dwell on Nicole or Evan or any of it. They were part of my story, yes, but they no longer had power over me. I was free of them, free of the pain they'd caused, free to write the next chapter of my life on my terms. I started meeting new people, cautiously at first but with growing confidence. Claire had introduced me to a coworker of hers, a woman named Sophie who was kind, intelligent, and refreshingly genuine. We met for coffee a few times, our conversations flowing easily, unburdened by the past. Sophie wasn't like Nicole. She didn't demand attention or thrive on drama. She was steady, grounded, a reminder that not all connections had to be fraught with betrayal and pain. Whether or not things with Sophie would go anywhere didn't matter. What mattered was that I was open to the possibility of something new, something better. One night, as I closed the door to my newly renovated home, I glanced at the box of memories I'd tucked away in the corner of the closet. The photos, the mementos, the remnants of a life I no longer wanted. They were still there, but they didn't haunt me anymore. I didn't need to burn them or throw them away. They were part of my story, but they didn't define me. As I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, I felt a quiet sense of contentment. The life I had now wasn't the one I'd planned, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, I was excited to see what came next. Because this time, I wasn't looking back. I was looking forward, and the future felt brighter than ever.